Bienvenue to Bonjour Paris Live. Our online event series, free for Bonjour Paris members, offers expert lectures, discovery talks, and conversations about la vie française. In between your trips to France, we're here to inspire you. Bonjour Paris has been online since 1995, almost as old as the internet itself. Our website is packed with interesting articles about the culture and history of Paris. And now, thanks to the support of our growing membership base, we're able to showcase new offerings like video and online talks. For details about all the benefits of Bonjour Paris membership, visit our membership page on our website. Enjoy today's presentation and à bientôt!
Hello, welcome, bienvenue, welcome to Bonjour Paris Live. I'm Sylvia Davis, culture editor for France Media and your host today for our conversation with Charles Pappas, author of Nobody Sits Like the French, as he shares with us how the World Fairs shaped Parisian architecture, culture, and daily life. And with that, I will now invite Charles to start his video.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Charles. Well, it's lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. And thank you for graciously inviting me to talk about a subject I never get tired of talking about, helping World Expos change the world, and especially
we can't wait. We're very excited about your presentation. Oh, let me introduce you in case anybody missed the previous introduction. Charles Pappas has been covering the expo industry worldwide for Exhibitor magazine for more than 20 years. He is the author of the books Flying Cars, Zombie Dogs, and Robot Overlords, and Expo 2020 Dubai, the definitive edition, among others, both of which are about to be about the transformative power of world exhibitions. His articles have won several national and regional ASBPE, Maggie, and Tabby awards. Charles serves as an advisor for the U.S. effort to win the 2031 International Horticultural Expo and as co-chair of the Institute for the Study of International Exhibitions. And Charles, of course, again, is the author of Nobody Sits Like the French, which is the subject of this talk today. So how about it, Charles, if you're ready?
I'm ready.
Over to you.
Let's go. Again, thank you so much for having me on today. Now, when someone says Paris, the city you imagine in your head, whether it's the Eiffel Tower, whether it's Art Nouveau, or even if it's Emily in Paris or Ratatouille, all of it kind of exists because of the 7 World Expos that were held in Paris between 1855 and 1937. Every time you sip a glass of Burgundy, you drink from Baccarat Crystal, you admire a Monet, pack a suitcase, you're doing something that hit the tipping point at a World Expo in Paris. Without the expos, you really don't have Jules Verne in many ways, the Eiffel Tower, and in some ways, even the Louvre. Now, I got the idea because I was an advisor a few years ago for the effort to win Expo 2027 in the US as well. We were in Paris for the vote, and we thought we had a very, very good shot at it. Our only competition, we thought, was Malaga, Spain. But it turned out Belgrade in Serbia won it. And we were very dejected. It kind of was a bolt out of the blue. And I remember being very depressed and basically just walking around Paris, wandering, just thinking about that funeral going on in my brain for what I thought would be an expo in the US. And I wandered into the Petit Palais where they were having an exhibition about Sarah Bernhardt. And while I was in there, in that marvelous building, it hit me that so much, again, of the image of Paris we have came directly because of the World Expos. It's a lens through which you can view Paris. And I think once you view it, you'll never quite see Paris the same again. Now, I hope you're sitting down for this next part. If you were in Paris yesterday, or if you were there 100 years ago at Café de la Rotonde, you might 100 years ago have been sitting with Picasso or Modigliani there, or maybe just tourists if it was yesterday. But the one common thread they have is the bistro chair. When TV shows or movies want to show Paris, inevitably they go to the Eiffel Tower, right? Because that's kind of the universal visual language for Paris, if you will. And yet the bistro chair is really, I think, the ideal symbol for much of Paris in many ways. And it's German in origin. It's not French. It was also known as the number 14 chair and sometimes Thanet, based after its maker, a Michael Thanet, who was from the Rhine Valley in Germany. Now, it took him years to perfect this very design. He used steam to bend wood just the right way to get the perfect design. He would heat roughly half a dozen pieces of beech wood with steam, put them into cast iron molds so they would set and dry in a certain way. And then he would use woven palm or cane for the upholstery, so to speak, which is actually kind of ingenious because it allowed spilled or sometimes thrown beverages to basically just drain away through the upholstery itself. Now, he had worked on this, but to really launch it, he decided to attend an exhibit at the 1867 Universal Exposition in Paris. Now, to give you a sense of why he would do this, the population of Paris at that time was roughly 1.8 million. There were 15 million people who came to that expo. That gives you an idea of how many would be introduced to it. His chair, the number 14 chair, which we now just call the bistro chair, won a gold medal. And from that time on, it became more French than anything else. It was also helped by the fact that his patent expired in 1869, just 2 years later. That meant everybody could make these chairs, and they did. I liken it to an immigrant to a country who becomes more native than the natives themselves. Over the years, it's exhibited the staying power of sunrise. It's always there. It's everywhere. Oddly, this became the first mass-produced piece of furniture in the world. It's estimated that by 1930, 50 million units had been built. And in the early 1960s, IKEA even brought out a plastic version of it. Not quite the same, but I think you can still appreciate how unusual it was that this furniture immigrant came into Paris and used an expo to become one of the most endearing and enduring parts of French life. Now, since it's roughly dinner time where you are and lunchtime where I am, let's get to the food. Now, cheese obviously holds a celebrated place in French culture and history. And I've read that the average French person consumes about 27 kilograms, give or take, of cheese annually, and there's roughly 1,200 varieties of French cheese. In fact, didn't Charles de Gaulle once lament about the challenge of governing a country that makes so many cheeses, which is basically a metaphor for France's diversity of opinion and tradition. Now, cheese at World Expos actually has a long tradition. Canada made one for the 1893 Expo in Chicago that was something like 1.8 meters high and weighed about 900 kilos. 1964 in New York, the state of Wisconsin in America, where I was born and raised, actually built a 35,000-pound cheese for that World's Fair. But I think those pale behind what happened at the French Expos. Roquefort actually became Roquefort, the brand, if you will, at the Expos. Now, its legend was well known that centuries ago, a shepherd who was distracted by the prospect of love, a liaison with some young lovely, left his cheese in a limestone cave, only to return much later and discover it had become moldy and delicious. The cheese went on to be treasured by apparently Caesar and Charlemagne alike. And in fact, there were kingly decrees, royal decrees in the Middle Ages that protected its production and its authenticity from roughly the 15th century onward. But it really became Roquefort the brand at the 1855 exposition in Paris, the first of the Parisian Expos. It was showcased there alongside porcelain, dueling pistols, and the saxophone. But it won acclaim. So they thought they would continue that trend at the 1862 Expo in London. No go. The English turned up their nose at it, said it smelled bad, and would not allow tasting of it. It had to be put under glass cases, really like a museum display where you couldn't get any sense of the aroma or the taste. Now, the business group that covered this, the Society of Caves, was in a tight spot. How do you promote something known for smell and taste when marketing at the time really didn't advertise those things, really didn't focus on those aspects? So what they did is they devised a new tactic for the 1867 Expo back again in Paris. What they did is outside their exhibit, they put out a pamphlet. Now, this seems really obvious today, but it wasn't that way then. They recounted the legends of the cheese with Charlemagne and Caesar, and how it had a unique taste and aroma. So thousands of people who passed by the exhibit picked up the brochure and took it home, including the media of that day. They essentially copied it word for word when they wrote about it and spread the word of it past even the millions who attended the expo. Even the expo management cited that particular function, that particular promotional technique as a, quote, clever device, unquote. Again, old hat to us, obvious to us, but it was new then, and they really, really helped establish their brand. Now, they didn't rest there. At the 1878, 1889, and 1900 expos, Roquefort and the Society of Caves that managed the brand actually went several steps further. They started using photographs from where the cheese was made. So it gave kind of a sense of, here you are, a sense of authenticity and history to it. Then they created life-size cave reconstructions of where the cheese is aged. They even featured at those pavilions live sheeps, as well as cheese samples. So you got an incredibly immersive experience and authentic experience, if you will, that in terms of marketing was decades ahead of its time. So by 1900, again, the cheese was recognized as a star among cheeses. Expos has helped it reach a tipping point. And by 1925, which coincidentally was the expo in Paris then as well that focused on Art Deco, it gained the controlled designation of origin status, meaning it was legally protected, much like champagne. And while the Eiffel Tower seems permanent, it was often in danger of disappearing. Now, in 1886, the Parisian planners for the 1889 Expo started to gather to choose what they felt would be an appropriate centerpiece for the Expo. There were anywhere from 107 to 700 proposals, depending on who's doing the counting. But a few stand out for their audacity that might have been built in place of the Eiffel Tower. One was shaped like a watering can. And it was promoted for its cooling effect on the area that it could have during the hot days, like you're having in France right now. It was a functional watering can. The other one, which I find really fascinating, was a 1,000-foot tall, 300 meters, intended to commemorate the Reign of Terror. And that 1,000-foot tall structure would have been a guillotine, nicknamed, of course, the National Razor. Can you imagine that looming over Paris for more than a century? Now, at the time, because the 1889 Expo was commemorating the revolution, maybe it's not too surprising that several monarchies, including Belgium, Spain, Portugal, Russia, Italy, the Netherlands, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and Austria-Hungary, declined to attend. They were sort of wary of celebrating a revolution that had separated so many royals from their heads. The guillotine, the giant guillotine, was never built, but they did feature a replica of the Bastille, where visitors could go and you could explore the dungeons as they had been recreated, and you could also watch staged prison breaks. It must have been quite entertaining. Now, we all know that the Eiffel Tower was chosen, and it's much beloved today, but we have an inkling of how much it was disliked at first. 300 artists, and the idea, I think, here was to match the 300 meters of the Eiffel Tower's height, signed a petition called Artists Against the Eiffel Tower. They said it was a gigantic black smokestack. It was ridiculous. It was skinny. It was hideous. It was a hideous column with railings. And my favorite, though, the exclamation point on all these objections was that it was observed that even the barbaric Americans would understand just how ugly it was. But the tower rose and public opinion shifted. And as they say, follow the money. Well, I think part of the reason for its success was the way it could be monetized. Retailers at that time would sell Eiffel-themed trinkets, little statues, Eiffel-sculpted chocolates, and there was even a, get this, diamond-studded model worth roughly $500,000 then, about 16 million euros today, that was eventually sold to someone in America. In time, it becomes known as the world's most valuable monument. It was worth an estimated, about a dozen years ago, it was estimated to be worth about 511 billion euros to France. Of course, even as it went up, people wanted to change it. One inventor proposed a machine for sensational emotions. It was a 20,000-pound bullet that would drop from the top of the Eiffel Tower into 1,000 feet into a man-made lake and actually probably kill most of the people who were sitting in it. Never came to be, but that's okay. Another proposal was to replace it with a 450-foot tall statue of a woman with a waterfall for her legs and searchlights in her eyes. Alphonse Mucha actually proposed changing the Eiffel Tower into a museum of mankind, where the top half would have been a museum, the bottom half would have been coiled nudes over another very sensuous nude. Would have been highly erotic, even though, and interesting though, it never came to pass. In 1904, for the St. Louis exposition that year, the World Expo there, they almost disassembled the Eiffel Tower to ship it to St. Louis and assemble it there for the duration of the fair. But Eiffel was reluctant, and he finally decided not to because he thought enough people still objected to the tower that they might find a way to prevent him from rebuilding it. So even though, if I had a motion picture camera, I would probably draw the camera back from pictures of champagne or cheese to the overall look of the city itself. And that's because of Baron Haussmann, who renamed Paris. Now, maybe you know that. And he had the nickname of the Demolisher, which to me sounds like a great comic book villain. But it actually belonged to him. It was his nickname. In 1855, with the World Expo coming, Napoleon III found a Paris plagued by poverty, overcrowding, and he wanted it to look more like Vienna and London, the parks in London, the boulevards in Vienna. So they looked for someone who could change the city appropriately on a massive scale. Haussmann actually got the job without any architectural training. But the person who interviewed him said it was his absolute ego talking only about himself and his accomplishments that made me think this is someone who would have the force of will to drive it through. And you were right. The Haussmann style is really the picture of Paris you have today in many ways. The buildings that stand from 12 to 20 meters tall, they have the very deeply sloped mansard roofs set at a 45-degree angle. They're made with that cream-colored limestone, locally sourced. He paved roughly 85 miles, about 140 kilometers of new boulevards. That, in turn, allowed the cafe society, cafe culture to bloom. He even changed the street lamps and the parks to the tune of almost $90 billion worth of changes, about 75 billion euros. They increased the number of arrondissements from 12 to 20. He took a wrecking ball to 20,000 buildings and the 120,000 homes inside them. He replaced them with 34,000 new buildings that housed roughly about 215,000 apartments. All of it was what Napoleon III hoped would, in his phrase, air, unify, and beautify Paris. And he did a fantastic job of it. Now, Haussmann also changed the lampposts and the bandstands in 27 parks and squares. He even worked it down to that minute detail. The funny thing is, he was eventually kicked out of his job and died forgotten in the early part of the 20th century. In 1927, he was actually finally honored with a boulevard named after him. He finally got the recognition he was due. So the last thing I want to mention today is that everyone from Charles Dickens to Bill Gates has been inspired by a World Expo. But the French have a few acts of inspiration, which I think top them all. 1867 Expo. There's a man wandering around. He sees two giant aquarium, the first of their kind, which, by the way, established the idea of the aquarium we visit around the world today. He wanders around. He sees 800 species of fish, even a giant cuttlefish, which looks kind of monstrous. He sees a prototype of the world's first diving suit. He sees a prototype of the French Navy's model submarine. It hits him. That guy is Jules Verne. 3 years later, he produces 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It hit his imagination so strongly, he couldn't let go of it, and he incorporated all of it into one of the great, actually, works of science fiction, one of the earlier works of science fiction, and an adventure tale that doesn't grow stale no matter how many years go by. The Expos also influenced and inspired composers like Debussy, who kind of got the gamelan music of Java at the Expos. 1855, there were pre-mixed paint tubes that let painters avoid having to mix their own paints and being stuck in their studios. Renoir said these were essential for the Impressionist movement because so many of them painted outside. But perhaps my favorite tale of inspiration is Monet. Now, he would have been great no matter what, but I think what made him immortal, 1889 at the Expo, he's walking around the Eiffel Tower. Again, touring, looking at things randomly, just taking in all the wonders. And he sees a horticulturalist, an exhibit by a horticulturalist who had finally been able to take the bland white water lilies common to Europe and France and had been able to breed them with the more colorful American ones. Monet looks at it. He's thunderstruck. He sees the riot of colors. He goes home. He orders all these lilies to build his garden, and he begins painting that famous series of water lilies. And what I like most about that is that it's kind of a testament to serendipity. What if he had never attended the Expo? What if he had walked in another direction? But the Expos, with so many wonders, so many serendipitous encounters you can have, fuel this nonstop. And I really do think that the French have done it better than anyone else. So thank you for letting me bend your ear. And if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's just fascinating. And we're just here just on the surface of all the stories that emerge from this. It's what we're showing on the screen now is, of course, to follow Charles's work on his website, and then you have his email. He kindly has said that he doesn't mind, Charles doesn't mind, if you would like to write to him and continue this conversation, which is absolutely wonderful. And you also have a QR code, so if you point your phone there, it'll take you directly to the book. And we already have questions coming in. You ready, Charles?
Yeah. Okay. Fire away.
So Julia asks, there is a giant barrel on display where one enters the Mercier Champagne house in Épernay. Do you know if this is the original barrel that made it to the exposition, or is it a replica?
As far as you know, it's partly some of the original, and I think it's been kept up through the years. So they moved much of it back. And then, no, I'm not sure how much of it is the original at this point, because again, over, 136 years, they would have to replace some of it. But it gives you a pretty authentic idea of what people would have encountered. And one aspect I really liked about what they did, they raised it at the Expo, Julia. And so you could walk under it. And it gave you that sense of, my God, this could fall on me. But it gave you a sense of how heavy it was, of how much it was holding. More so if it had been flush with the ground and you just looked at it head on, which would have been impressive. But to walk under it, you feel this is huge. This is really massive. And they kept it right. They kept it at their headquarters now. It gives you an idea of how popular this was, how much it helped the company, and what a great marketing idea it was. And, I preach this. The French did it better than almost anyone else. They deserve the accolades. They deserve the recognition for all this.
It is impressive today, so I can imagine back then,
Indeed.
Nobody would have seen anything like it. Amazing. And there's another question coming in. Do you think Paris will ever hold another fair?
They tried to get it for 2025. Osaka in Japan won it. However, when they were bidding for it, they withdrew. Paris withdrew because of the cost of the Olympics. And I think they felt in many ways that they couldn't do justice necessarily to it. And I feel part of that is that in the West, we tend to view expos as an item of nostalgia. That it's when I ask somebody in America about World Expos or World Fairs, do you know what they say? Do they still have those? Or my grandmother went to one of those. What they don't realize is that the developing world has adopted them and used them to launch their brand as a nation. So since the Expo of 2000, it's 6 of the 9 expos have been away from the old orbit, the old arc of Paris, New York, Chicago, places like that. It's been in Aichi, Japan. Shanghai in 2010 was huge. Yosu in South Korea. Astana in Kazakhstan. Dubai. Now Osaka. And in 2030, it'll be in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. While we view them as, there's an American word, boondoggle, for that costs a whole lot of money and you don't get a lot for it. You know, it's unfortunate because these other countries are dead serious when they have it. They understand its soft power. And I think in the West, we've lost the belief in that. And these expos also preach a kind of techno-optimism. They believe that technology can give us a better future, and they promote it. We tend to be more cynical about it. Maybe we have reason to be cynical about it, but cynicism is not a strategy. Cynicism is not a plan for the future. And I think perhaps Paris could have done an elegant one, a beautiful one, but would the public pride have been there? Would the public have been willing to fund much of the creation of it? That's the question.
And another question is, was there anything that didn't remain from the Paris Expos that you wish had?
Yes. The entrance for the 1900 Paris Expo was Port Monumental. It was about 35 meters high, and it was biomorphic. It was designed based on nature. A painter named René Bonnet has designed it, and he based it on the work of a German scientist named Ernst Haeckel, who studied microscopic creatures named Radiolaria. Bonnet saw the pictures of these, the drawings of them, and he simply did a monster-sized version of the microscopic creature with, on top, a voluptuous statue of what some say is Sarah Bernhardt, but which other Parisians disavowed and objected to because they said her dress and her gown looked more like a prostitute. It was incredibly controversial. I wish they had kept that. And think about it. Instead of a boring entrance, you got this as your entrance. Mm-hmm. You could talk about it. You could argue about it while you're waiting for your time to go in. Instead of, just going through the turnstiles. And by the way, fun fact, turnstiles were introduced for the 1855 Expo in Paris. They gave us that. And if you want some fun, look at the drawings by Daumier on satirizing the people, the women with really thick gowns trying to get turns. It's really delightful.
That's really good.
That entrance for the 1900 Expo, I would give anything to go back in time and experience it.
When you refer to the female figure, is this La Parisienne?
Yes.
Yeah. I've read about that. It was quite a shock because so far the figure of a woman had always been Marianne, like a countryside type of a figure. And this was, Parisienne was very much a city, a woman dressed in city clothes.
Indeed. I love it. Because, here's something that the French did, which other expos avoid: controversy.
Yes.
They are willing to go to extreme. They are willing to take a step beyond what you would conventionally accept. We're willing to take a chance.
As we saw in the Olympics.
Why not? And that's another thing that endears me to the French expos, which again, it comes back to my title. Nobody sits like the French, which is really a shorthand way of saying nobody did the expos like the French.
Excellent title. And this brings me to my next question. If you can tell us,
please.
This is from me, what are you working on next?
I'm hoping to do a sequel to the book. If the book is popular enough, I would like to do a sequel because there's so many other stories. And in fact, I'd like to talk more about the Louvre. Now, obviously, that predates the Expos, but what many of us don't know is that it was actually a place before 1855, before the first Parisian Expo, where painters basically went to copy great works of art. It really wasn't for the public. But in 1855, they realized we should make this into an institution accessible to the public. Hence, the Louvre becomes a tourist attraction. Even then, all these stories that are still, I had deadlines, so I couldn't do, many.
No, it's impossible to fit that.
There's a saying that no writer ever finishes his work, he just abandons it. And that's definitely true. I had to abandon it for the deadline, but there's so many more things the French did. And in fact, I'd like to give you a little anecdote about it. I was a consultant. I worked for the Dubai Expo. I was also working for my magazine at that time, but I had a chance to kind of see how the expos were made because I did some of the work. And when the expo was getting to a close, a private corporation wanted to pitch the government of Dubai their plan for what to do to the expo site afterwards. So they asked me to do a presentation. So I went in and I based it on one thing. I based it on 7 common denominators that I thought made a successful expo. They were all French. They were all from the French. And it was sort of funny that the reaction I got was not interested. Not interested. Yeah, one person said, yeah, we don't need another museum. And I remember thinking, you haven't listened to anything history can teach you. You haven't listened to anything that shows how expos can last almost 2 centuries and still be popular and change a city for the better. But their idea, they actually wanted me to say we should make it into a haven for cryptocurrency, which fortunately did not take off, was not accepted. But that was the mindset. Ignore the things that have been successful that Paris showed so very, very well. They could do a supremely good job of. But
well, I hope you keep trying, Charles.
and I intend to. I
Yes.
take great delight in it, and I love seeing and visiting the city, and it just experience it through that lens. I hope if you do try the book, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it gives you some real pleasure in the next time you're in Paris.
Thank you so much. And it certainly does, because you can never see Paris the same way again. You will start noticing all these details, which brings me to the winner of today's giveaway. Let me just pull it up real quick. It is Julia G. So Julia, you will receive an email. Congratulations. And you will get Charles's book. So I hope you can come back, Charles, and tell us more stories, because it's just absolutely fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise and all this hard work and research. And good luck with the horticultural exhibition.
Good luck, we'll win it.
Yes. When will you know?
Probably within a few months.
Oh,
Because
excellent.
it takes several years to plan, so I think we'll know within a few months. And
Fingers crossed.
it would be fantastic to
Yeah.
have it, because it's Expo.
Excellent. And I don't know if you can see, but there are hearts and applause emojis coming up. So with that, let me invite everybody to our next. It is on August 7th. It is the fascinating story of Jo van Gogh. That's Vincent's sister-in-law, so Theo's wife, who took it upon herself to champion Vincent's legacy. She believed in Vincent before he died, but after his death, she was particularly instrumental in keeping his legacy alive and keeping his work organized and together. And Joan Fernandez, author of the novel Saving Vincent, will be with us, drawing from 7 years of research for this novel to tell us about this lesser known story of a chapter in art history. So I'll hope to see you then. And thank you again, Charles. This was absolutely wonderful. And from all of us at, Julia says, excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for
Julia.
your time.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your participation and all your great questions. And see you here again on August 7th. And from all of us at France Today, merci et à bientôt.
Merci.